And this is the beginning of a seed war right here. We see in verse 15 where God says, I'm going to put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed, and it shall bruise or crush thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. Getting your head crushed is a bad thing, don't you think? So what do you think the devil's going to do? If you're receiving that prophecy, her seed is going to crush your head. What do you think you're going to do to her seed? Try to get rid of it as soon as you can.
Well, we're going to talk about the Book of Giants here for a little bit because it is exquisitely relevant to what we've been discussing. I've been studying the Book of Giants and writing about the Book of Giants and working with the Book of Giants for the last couple of weeks, because that's the next El Bueno analysis that's coming out in the next couple of days, is on the Book of Giants. So I'm going to give people a brief overview without getting into too much detail, because, again, it is so relevant to what we're talking about. Steve mentioned that the Book of Giants was found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are a collection of some 981 texts that were discovered between 1946 and 1956 in the caves of Qumran. And those were they were discovered in caves on the cliffs of the Dead Sea, near the cliffs of the Dead Sea. That's why they're called the Dead Sea Scrolls. But anyways, the Dead Sea Scrolls, by the way, contain every single book in the Bible and in the Jewish and the Hebrew proto-canon, except for the Book of Esther. I don't know why the Book of Esther is excluded, but every other book of the Bible, and not just one copy, by the way, various copies of each book are present in the Dead Sea Scrolls. But besides that, also, a lot of the apocryphal works are also present in the Dead Sea Scrolls, including the Book of Jubilees, the Genesis Apocryphon, the Book of Noah, obviously the Book of Enoch, and the Book of Giants. By the way, all of those that I just mentioned, along with some other of the books from the Bible, were all found together in Cave 1 of Qumran, which I find interesting because all of the ones I just mentioned, the Book of Jubilees, the Genesis Apocryphon, the Book of Noah, the Book of Enoch, and the Book of Giants, they all follow the same narrative, i.e. the Genesis 6 narrative, the Watchers and the giants and the sexual or genetic corruption of all life on earth, and of course the flood. So the Book of Giants is probably follows in terms of the way it's written and the details of the story that's laid out in the Book of Giants. As Steve mentioned, it's fragmented, but there's enough there to really get a vivid picture of what's going on. But it's most similar to the Book of Enoch, and it seems to have been written. It seems to have been written based on the Book of Enoch. But the point is that the Book of Giants really spells out some things that I have yet to find in some of these other apocryphal works, and that the Bible doesn't really identify the way that the Book of Giants does. And one of those things is something that is very provocative to me, and that's the idea that not only did these fallen angels, watchers as they're called in some of the old manuscripts. By the way, watcher is a specific classification amongst the angels. Remember, I said the term angels is very general. Well, watchers is a specific order of angels, and that term watcher, I don't remember exactly where it is in the book of Daniel, but it's in the book of Daniel. So it's not that people say, well, that term is extra biblical. No, it's not. It is a biblical term, the term watcher. It is identifying a very specific kind of angelic being. And as Steve mentioned, there were 200 of these watchers that fell. That's the narrative of the book of Enoch. That narrative is picked up in the book of Giants. And like I was saying, there's a very provocative issue that the book of Giants deals with, which is the idea that these watchers purposely and insidiously genetically contaminated the animals on the earth. And that's alluded to in the book of Enoch, and it's alluded to in the Bible, but it is spelled out mathematically in the book of Giants. Namely, the book of Giants says that 200 donkeys, 200 asses, 200 rams of the flock, 200 goats, 200 beasts of the field, from every animal, from every bird. And there's some missing fragments here, so it's naming other animals that we don't have in the text because they're missing. But all of these 200 of all the things I just mentioned were selected for miscegenation. And the word miscegenation means, it refers to the mixing of races or species, particularly in the context of sexual intercourse. So everybody just let that sink in for a minute. These watchers, these angelic beings, fallen angelic beings, purposely selected 200, they chose certain species of animals, including birds. And I'm guessing that the missing fragments are also going to identify reptiles and fish and all other kind of all other species as well. But what we have here is a handful of animals that these watchers selected, and they selected 200 of each one. Why? Because there were 200 of them. There were 200 fallen watchers. And so they made sure that every single one of them, of the fallen watchers, would be able to inseminate each kind of species that was selected. Think about that. Think about how calculated and intentional this is, what they're doing. I mean, it is devious. It's absolutely maniacal. They're purposely trying to generate monsters. And that's exactly what happens. That's exactly what the result is. It says, so let me make this clear again. This term, miscegenation, is referring to the mixing of races and species, particularly in the context of sexual intercourse, which means they probably were having sex with these animals. And for people who have a problem with that, hey, listen, we barely understand the physics. We barely understand the physics that we're working with as the human race. There's no way that we could even begin to understand the physics that angels work with and that they understand. So making things bigger, smaller, transforming themselves into different shapes and different animals or whatever, that's all possible for these guys. So that answers the question of how. Now, these guys, these fallen angels, these watchers, they were not mixing species in terms of interspecies breeding like you would do with two dogs. We're talking about extreme cross-species genetics involving the seed of the angels themselves. We're not just talking about the angels taking, like I said, a donkey and let's say a bird or a goat and somehow getting them to copulate. That's not what we're talking about. The book of Giants says, it spells out that these angels purposely selected these creatures so that they could insert their own seed into them. And it's unequivocal that it was their own seed, because the result is that these animals conceive monsters, not just monsters, sentient monsters. We're going to get to that in a minute. So here's another fragment from the book of Giants explaining this. They defiled. They begot giants and monsters. Speaking of the fallen watchers. They begot, and behold, the whole earth was corrupted. Now, that word defiled is often used not only throughout the Old Testament and throughout the New Testament, but also in all these ancient manuscripts. It's often used specifically to describe sexual sin, that they were sexually defiling these animals and life on earth. And so it's important to note, and this is the really provocative part to me, it's important to note that not only were giants begotten of the fallen angels, but also monsters. And that is the term in the book of Giants, monsters. Remember, not just one kind of monsters. We're talking about a litany of animals, of animals and birds and probably reptiles and fish that they inserted their angelic seed into. And people are going to say, well, as Steve mentioned earlier, the what I think is the most lame argument in the world, well, the Bible says angels don't marry. Who's talking about marriage? We're just talking about getting it on with whatever these guys could get their hands on. Nobody's talking about marriage. They didn't marry the animals. They just inseminated them. They're going around inseminating everything. Why? Everything that, all life, basically. The Bible literally says all flesh was corrupted. So they're inseminating everything. And I want you to remember something, is that if you take a goat, for example, and you do cross-species genetics on that goat, and if you do it properly, the creature that will come as a result, let's say of a goat and a pig, the creature that will come as a result, if you do it properly, will be able to procreate and will be able to then pass down those genes, those genetic markers, into their offspring. So it wasn't just that they just went out and chose a handful of animals. They wanted to screw around with them for sexual pleasure and to progenerate monsters. They knew that by doing this, they would infect all life on the planet, because those monsters would then procreate and create more monsters. It's a domino effect. This was a very decisive, calculated thing. Okay, so they start to impregnate these animals. They start to inseminate these animals. These animals give birth to monsters. And the Book of Giants indicates that these monsters, because they had the seed of their fathers, the fallen angels, they were sentient. And here's a little fragment that proves that they were sentient. Thereupon, two of them had dreams, and the sleep of their eyes fled from them, and they arose and came to and told their dreams, and said, and by the way, this is referring to the giants are having these dreams, and said in the assembly of their comrades, the comrades of the giants, the monsters. So the giants are only one kind of entity, and by the way, the book of Enoch says that they all look different one from another. The giants were only one kind of entity, specifically part angel, part watcher, part human. So they were angel-human hybrids. The monsters are angel-animal hybrids, angel-bird hybrids, angel-reptile hybrids, angel-mammal hybrids, okay? Everything you can imagine, probably insects, who knows? Everything you can imagine. These guys were intentionally defiling everything. And so you have these monsters. So these monsters were basically, they were the stepbrothers of the giants. They really were. They were stepbrothers and cousins of the giants. They had the same fathers, but they probably didn't have the same intellectual capacity of the giants, because the giants had human mothers, whereas the monsters had beasts for mothers. And so there's a hierarchy here that you can see that starts to develop. So just imagine 200 angels selecting a litany of species on the earth, and each one of them having intercourse or inseminating every one of those species that they selected. And then those divergent monsters procreating and probably mixing and matching among themselves. Are people starting to get the picture of what the days of Noah look like? Of what the pre-flood world looked like? There is no mythology on the face of the planet that can even come close to describing what the scenario was. That can even come close. I mean, there were monsters and giants, and then it begins to describe, the Book of Giants begins to describe later on how they were terrorizing the earth. The giants and their brothers and their stepbrothers, the monsters, were terrorizing the earth, and they were consuming flesh, which was forbidden at that time, and they began to consume the human race as well, who was also becoming defiled. And the human race, by the way, the giants, and this is another thing that is indicated in the Book of Giants, the giants were the rulers of the earth. The giants were the ones who had the dominion, and obviously that makes a lot of sense, since they were probably way more intelligent than the human race, because they had the genetics of their fathers, the fallen angels, and the fallen angels taught them. The Book of Enoch says this, and the Book of Giants, the fallen angels, the fallen watchers, their fathers taught them, and not just them, but their wives as well, meaning the wives of the fallen angels. They taught them what's called the secrets of heaven. In both the Book of Giants and the Book of Enoch refers to it as the secrets of heaven. Listen, we would refer to the secrets of heaven as advanced physics, mathematics, chemistry, astrology, etc. So the idea that the giants would be capable would not only be superior to us in intelligence, but would also be capable of listen to me, of manufacturing and operating advanced technology, is certainly supported by the narrative that's laid out in the Bible, in the Book of Enoch, in the Book of Giants, and a host of other manuscripts, mythologies, as Steve mentioned. Every prime civilization on this planet, every prime civilization on this planet, ancient civilization, had stories and mythology concerning the sons of God or the gods coming down and intermingling with men. Every single one of them. So this is verified. Not only is it verified in the Bible, it's verified in the apocryphal works, and it's verified in history. How much more proof do people need? Well, guess what? They're going to get it pretty soon, unfortunately for them. They're going to get it because these things are going to start to appear again. And whether or not the fallen angels start to inseminate all these animals again, regardless of whether they do this again or are doing it, regardless of that, we're doing it. We're doing it. We're doing the cross-species genetics now. We're opening Pandora's box. So even if people listening to this show right now don't have a spiritual paradigm for this, a biblical paradigm, understand that we're beginning to create, and we have been for years, create genetic aberrations. And there's going to be very scary consequences, and there already have been. So the Book of Giants really delineates some of this. And another interesting anecdote from the Book of Giants is that there's a reference made to at least one of the giants, specifically Mahwe, who was the son of Barakel, the watcher Barakel, was able to fly. He had the ability of flight. And here's a little fragment from the Book of Giants explaining this. He mounted up in the air, meaning Mahwe, and he was a giant, like strong winds, and flew with his hands like eagles. He left behind the inhabited world and passed over desolation, the great desert. He was on his way to visit Enoch, by the way, because the giants sought out Enoch to interpret their dreams, because they began to have dreams, and this is what the bulk of the Book of Giants is about. They began to have dreams about the flood, that there was impending judgment coming, and the dreams were really troubling them, and so they sought out Enoch to interpret the dreams. But my point here is that at least one of the giants, according to the Book of Giants, was able to fly. Now, and I make this point in my analysis, by the way. I break all this down in the analysis for people who want to know more about this. It's coming out in a couple of days. The giants, I mean, this could mean that he had the capability to fly. It could mean that because his father was Barakel, was a watcher, was a fallen angel, he might have genetically inherited something that gave him the innate capability of flight. Alternatively, this could be a reference, a rhetorical device that is making an allusion to technology, to aircraft. And of course, anyone familiar with the ancient Sanskrit writings and the Vimanas and the flying machines and the legends about Solomon having a flying machine, there's many, many legends about flying machines from the ancient world. So this here could also be an indication that the giants were, in fact, using technology. I'm sure they were, because their fathers, the fallen angels, were teaching them all kinds of mysteries that are far superior to what we have today in terms of, like I said, in terms of mathematics and physics and astrology and so forth. So basically, I'll give everybody, again, this is going to be repeated in my analysis, so everybody can get this in the analysis. But I'm going to break down really quickly here, basically the chronological order of this in 2 minutes, and then I'll kick it back to Steve. This is what the Book of Giants breaks down. And remember, this is not just the Book of Giants. This corresponds and correlates perfectly with the Book of Enoch, with Genesis 6 and all the different mythologies and everything around the world. So this is basically the narrative of the Book of Giants. 200 angelic beings called Watchers made a pact to defy God. They literally made a pact to defy God and descended to the earth in the days of Jared. They took human women as wives and had sexual intercourse with them. Their wives gave birth to hybrid giants. The Watchers taught their wives and children the secrets of heaven, and the human race was beguiled by the forbidden knowledge. The giants began to rule over the inhabitants of the earth. The Watchers chose animals from diverse species 200 of each kind, in order to copulate with them and progenerate genetic aberrations. The animals conceived hybrid monsters according to their respective species. Nearly all life on the planet became genetically corrupted and flesh-eating or carnivorous. The giants and the monsters terrorized the earth and devoured the human race. The giants began to have foreboding dreams and visions that deeply troubled them. They decided to seek out Enoch to interpret the dreams. Enoch presents them with a copy of the tablet addressed to the watchers, pronouncing a terrible judgment from God upon them, their wives, and their children. The giants are in denial concerning their inevitable fate. The watchers come to the assembly of all their offspring, and with great sorrow and weeping verify the terrible judgment written on the tablet. The giants, enticed by an angel of heaven, make war with one another and annihilate themselves. The watchers are bound by the angels of heaven and imprisoned in the abyss to the day of judgment. A great flood destroys all life on earth except Noah, his two sons, and their wives. Back to you, Steve.